everybody. I'm Viviana with the Live Realty Group. I'm here with Carson at the Live Realty Group. We are licensed realtors here in Alberta, and we get together every weekend and we just talk about trends and topics in the marketplace. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys. So Viv, we've been hearing a lot of thoughts about Airbnbs
Yes.
and their impact on rentals, house price increases, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I know you've been doing a lot of studying on that. Tell me some of your thoughts.
Well, a lot of my clients are buying in Sylvan Lake for Airbnbs, and there's actually a concept called the Air BnB Effect.
Okay.
And that is basically gentrification, where in a community where Airbnbs exist, slowly over time, the housing values go up, and then you basically price out the middle class and essentially the locals who live there.
Okay.
There was a study done in 2016 in Barcelona that essentially likened Airbnbs. Sorry, I shouldn't even call them Airbnbs. Like, it should be just short-term rental or vacation rental.
Okay, vacation
Because
rentals.
Airbnb is the company, whatever, it kind of blew everything up and provided everybody a platform to rent with ease. But we should call it short-term rentals. Anyways, so the study in Barcelona followed vacation rentals from the 1990s, where it sort of started being documented, into the 2000s, where investors and hotel companies started buying up all these apartment buildings for vacation flats.
Okay.
And then slowly landlords started phasing out long-term renters because they realized that they could make way more money on short-term vacation rentals than they could on long-term rentals. So it documented how the conversion of residential properties turned into vacation properties. And then when Airbnb came in as a company, a platform, it just sort of amplified what was already there. And all of a sudden, gentrification happened. So it followed from a study in 1985 that talked about gentrification, how it happens, and what happens to those communities.
So essentially, these Airbnbs have really shrunk the rental pool for people because they're just full up from tourists.
Yeah, and that's a concept called exclusionary displacement.
But being that an Airbnb is now a money-making property because you're making money on it, that also increases the value. It's not just comparing houses apples to apples. That is a money-making property now. So in turn, that affects the sales price as well.
Yeah.
Drives up house prices.
And supply and demand. If people want to be there, that demand for housing to be there, whether it's for a rental property or whether it's for a full-time residential property,
Right.
if people want to be there, your housing values go up.
Right.
There are communities all over, like dotted all over Central Alberta, where housing is crazy affordable, like $200,000 for a single family detached home.
Yeah.
But it's so cheap because you'll probably never be able to sell that home in the future. Nobody's going to buy it from you.
Okay.
Who's going to live in that
Well, I
community?
mean, that's not true because there's so many people screaming for affordable housing now. They just have to come to the realization that they may have to move from the community that they're currently in. And that's a big ask for people because people don't like change. They want to stay where they're comfortable. However, if you want to buy a homeowner or be a homeowner, you may have to make that move into something more affordable.
Yeah. It's not always possible for people. What if you have a family?
Oh, no,
What
I
if you
get
have a
it.
job? Anyway. But yeah, the study was really interesting because it actually touched on a concept that you and I talked about last
Okay.
week, where we talked about, do you remember our conversation about living in Airbnb communities?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It sucks.
Yeah,
I
it's
hate
rough.
it.
It's so rough. I want to move.
Yeah.
There's an actual term for that. It's
Okay.
called displacement pressure.
Okay.
So there's 3 types of displacement in gentrification. Displacement pressure is one of them, where you're just like the residents and the vacationers, there's a lifestyle impact there.
Okay.
And it's just a major disruption to the people who actually live there full time.
Right. Like for me, for example, like I live in townhouses. There's 2 buildings of 5 townhouses. So there's 10 total.
Yeah.
And I know over the past year or two, these all got snapped up. Soon as that interest rate and that boom happened and everybody from Ontario and BC started coming out to Alberta,
Super low interest rates.
people started snapping up these too because they're cheap, affordable, and they can make major dollars on them renting them out short term.
Yeah.
And so now I believe out of the total of 10, there's 6. And it's horrible during the 3-4 months of Airbnb season in Sylvan because you have more than 1 or 2 people coming into these units.
Yeah.
You have, families, there's 4 or 5 different vehicles and they saturate the area. I can't park in front of my house, which is super frustrating. And I know that parking on the street is not my parking, but I've been doing it for years. I bought into that house years and years ago. Prior to all this, I did not plan on moving into an Airbnb community, and I don't even want to be there anymore.
No, me neither. I live next to an Airbnb, and it's like month to month rental from, I think, end of September right up until May. And then it's just wild.
Yeah,
Airbnb.
partying
all night long.
all night long. They don't
Yeah.
stop.
And I
Monday,
feel-
Wednesday, whatever day.
Yeah, I feel super old because I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to go over there and complain. I would never complain about somebody who's just enjoying themselves in the summertime. It's vacation. I get it. But like, that's my money making season. I need to sleep. I work
Yeah.
from, all hours in the summertime. Like, we're busy. So it's so difficult, and it's such a disruption to your everyday life. Like you said, parking, even just regular amenities, traffic is crazy on my avenue. Like, I live on arguably the busiest avenue in Sylvan Lake, but like after 5 years, I'm kind of growing tired of it.
Yeah.
When the residents want to start moving out of those neighborhoods, they either put their houses up for sale, right? And in this study, it found that because of the conditions that were happening where you can make a ton of money Airbnb-ing, the only people who started buying up these properties from the residents were other tourist investors.
Right.
Because nobody wants to live there full time knowing that there's Airbnbs and short-term rentals going on.
Right.
So it just facilitates a snowball effect.
Completely changes the demographic.
Yeah.
So it's not the locals who are purchasing anymore. Now it's people with looking at their second or third home for investment.
Yeah.
And they are snapping these properties up, and just I get it.
It's so crazy. So then that leads into exclusionary displacement, which is the second type of displacement in the gentrification process, where all of a sudden the supply for rental housing, like long-term rental housing, has diminished. And when you find a unit that's suitable for your family or whatever, you actually can't afford that anymore on your local salary.
Right.
So that class of locals who is on the local salary, let's call them middle class, maybe lower class, they can stay in their properties or in their neighborhoods, but that forces them to live in poverty because their landlords are making so much money off of short-term rentals that it does not benefit them at all to rent out to a long-term renter.
Right.
So all of a sudden they're priced out of their neighborhoods.
Right.
Like, what if your family's lived in this community for 100 years?
Yeah.
All of a sudden you can't live there?
It's sad what the long-term effects of Airbnb are. I know the other day that I shot a video, and my thoughts were, you buy a house, you should be able to do what you want with it.
Within reason.
Within reason. Yeah, you got to take into your neighbors and your community into account.
Sure. Bylaws exist for that reason.
Exactly. So I thought, if I buy a property, I should be able to rent it out however I see fit. But when you dive into the effects of Airbnb,
short-term rental, vacation
right,
rental.
sorry, short-term rentals or vacation rentals, it does have a profound effect on the community that you may not see unless you do the research or read papers on it. I know that's probably what's happening a lot now. People just see dollar signs and want to move forward, and they don't think about the long-term effects of it.
Yeah.
Well, for the community.
Totally. The third displacement effect was called direct displacement, and that's when your landlord actually pays you to leave. Or just kicks you out.
Right.
Yeah. And so they saw a lot of that happening in Barcelona, and they were like, man, these three effects collectively just signify gentrification. Like, you can no longer afford to live here anymore. It's gentrified.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do. So it's, I don't know, man, like it's kind of crazy when you see it. The next buyers that come in is tourist buyers. So what happens to your community? It changes. And then my argument is, though, because there was another study coming out of McMaster University, and this was in, I can't remember exactly when, in 2023, and it referenced another Harvard study, but both of those studies just blamed Airbnb. They were like, Airbnb is the reason for the housing shortage. And I don't think it's fair to place the blame on a company that provided a platform for opportunity for people and just to amplify everything that went on.
Right. That platform just gave the ability for people to find those Airbnbs real quickly.
Users to use quickly and efficiently. Yeah. Everything it's a streamlining of a process. And I don't think that's the reason. Like, in Barcelona, this was already happening, right? Vacation homes were already a thing. Yeah. It was already displacing the community. Gentrification was already happening. Airbnb just sort of amplified the effects.
Yeah.
And now, after the fact, I guess we're looking back and we're looking at these studies. But that one from McMaster really kind of cheesed me a little bit because
Right.
they were like, Airbnb is a reason for it. And Airbnb is like, no, we're not.
There's far more reasons to that. Like so to go into that, I can now understand the thought process that a lot of people have, thinking that you should only be able to own one property. You know, it's a short-sighted thought, though.
It's a Band-Aid solution.
It goes much deeper than that.
Yeah.
But you can't just limit people to one property, because who's going to hold on to those rentals? Yeah, you can kind of limit the Airbnb thing going on. I understand that. But what about students that come straight out of high school, or not high school, university? They have heavy debt loads. They don't have a down payment saved up. They have
typical entry-level jobs.
Entry-level jobs with entry-level pay.
Yeah.
They can't afford to just jump into home ownership. So who's going to provide housing from those people? It's either going to be investors or it's going to be the government. So, I mean, really pick your poison on that one.
Yeah, do you want a big company owning your living quarters, or do you want the government owning your living quarters? I would rather have like a person, a sweet little old lady landlord who just wants to, you know, make some money off of her investment that she bought 40 years ago.
Yeah,
That's the ideal.
You would find that, so some stats from Stats Canada, 22% of Canadians own more than one home. So it seems like a substantial number. I mean, I guess 1 in 5.
Yeah, that's not bad.
1 in 4. But of that percentage, 8% of those are corporations. So really, it's not a huge number of people that own a second home. It's a smaller percentage. So overall, 66% of Canadians own a home their own, and 33% are renters.
I wonder if that 1 in 5, or the stat for corporations owning properties, like, I mean, you could incorporate a small business, and then you're still, you know, you're still just one person just operating a rental coming out of a business.
But you do have those big corporations that have apartment units, monopolies, you know, not monopolies, but they have, you know, that's how they make their money. You know, in Central Alberta, a big one is like Boardwalk Communities, right? They own a bunch of properties, they rent them out. So but that is not going to solve the problem. It's not.
No.
You know, we're talking about affordable housing here, which is another issue that plays on this.
Yeah, it's not a quick fix.
It's not. Affordable housing, I mean, the average income in Canada is $59,000 a year. So when you break that down into what CMHC says is that affordable housing is a housing that you can afford based on less than 30% of your gross income.
So off of 59,000, your budget would be
like approximately $14.75 per month. What is that going to afford you?
You can't find anything for that, especially if you have kids.
No.
Like,
if your mortgage payment is $14.75, you have other things. But if you were going to use $14.75 as a mortgage payment with 5% down, that's going to afford you a house of just under $230,000.
You could find a townhouse in Sylvan Lake, or not Sylvan Lake. Well, in Sylvan Lake, in Central Alberta.
Not at $230 anymore. Those townhouses are starting to.
They're creeping up.
They're going past $300.
Yeah.
You know, go into the outlying communities, you can find that stuff.
Yeah.
But $230. That's. I mean, let's go back to Vancouver or Maple Ridge. You know, the bigger hubs. Like, I know that I was looking the other day, and a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom condo is going to cost you north of $400,000. So not only do you have that payment, you also have condo fees.
And that's in Maple Ridge.
That's not even downtown Vancouver. That's a 30, 45-minute drive depending on traffic at any given time. So really, if you want to get into a house for a family, you got to have dual income. That's going to push your number up to, about $480. Still 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom in Vancouver or next to Vancouver.
Yeah.
But I mean, the benchmark pricing in Canada since 2015 to now has more than doubled. In 2015, benchmark price in Canada was $409,000 and is now $860.
Holy.
Like, the numbers have just gone up. That's inflation.
Yeah.
That's supply and demand. All of those numbers have increased this. And, the benchmark price in Red Deer right now is still remaining at about $400. It's actually $407. And this is for a 1,200 square foot, approximately 1,200 square foot, 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom, has a garage.
That's a comfortable house.
That's a decent price. It's affordable here in Central Alberta.
That's why I moved here.
That's the only reason I was able to get into a house, for sure. If I was still living in Vancouver,
no way.
I
can't go back home and afford anything right now. Like, there's no way.
Yeah. You go down to Calgary, and even Calgary is getting close to that benchmark across Canada. They're encroaching on $800,000 for their benchmark house.
Yeah. Can we talk about how crazy Calgary was this past week?
Absolutely. Go nuts.
Holy smokes. It's a bloodbath out there right now. Like, it's not even February, and houses are going pending after one day on the market, 50 showings. Kais had 17 offers on the table, and his buyer was one of them. And he
Wow.
was like, oh my God.
And, yeah.
Like,
so
it's
then
tough.
you have to go into multiple offers.
Yeah.
And then to make your offer more attractive, you kind of have to get away with, like, leave some conditions out. Typically, it's a home inspection condition, and that's just a horrible decision.
Absolutely.
Unless it's a brand new house, maybe it's not as horrible.
But still.
But still, you got to get to that inspection. You got to
Yes.
protect yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a video on builders forgetting to put in attic insulation.
Yes, I remember that.
Like,
that one's
we just went
nuts.
through like what, -50. Dude, I would not be able. Anyways,
So we're talking Airbnbs are a cause of inflation on houses.
short-term
lack of
rentals and vacation
sorry,
homes are a factor.
in
Affordability.
availability.
Yeah.
But I mean, really, we got to come down to, I think, what I think is the number one thing, and it's migration. Now, don't get me wrong here. I'm not against migration.
Yeah.
It's good to have migration,
Yeah.
but it has to be planned. You can't just have a mass amount of
Floodgates
people
opening.
coming in
Yeah.
and not have the housing available for them. It has a direct effect on supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who knows anything about economics knows that low supply, high demand shoots prices up, right? Like, it is what it is. Between 2017 and 2022, Calgary had 55,000 new home starts.
That's not a lot.
It's not a lot, considering you're in a community of over 1 million people.
Yeah.
Now, in that same time frame, there was 275,000 migrants to Calgary. Whether they were national or international, it wasn't recorded, or not for me anyways. I didn't look into that. Then you can even go into Vancouver. Vancouver had 100,000 housing starts, just over. And their population grew by 225,000.
Yeah.
So either way you cut it, there's more migration and their houses going up. And then your buddy, not your buddy, but you were telling me about him, Sean Fraser, the housing minister. Sean Fraser?
Not my buddy. Sean Fraser.
Yeah, Sean Fraser, sorry, the housing minister. He, in one of his news releases,
press releases.
he mentioned that he thought migration was a fix to some of this because you can bring in skilled labor. I get the thought process, again, short-sighted, because where are they going to live? And it's not about the speed of houses being built, it's about the affordability. Just because you build houses fast doesn't mean you can afford them.
No.
That there's a big deal with that inflation thing and supply and demand, and together they're driving up those house prices.
Inflation, construction costs, supply and demand.
Yeah.
What is it? Importing goods and transportation costs. All of those have like literally tanked builders.
I know the government is trying to implement some kind of incentives, like they're talking about, gifting builders $1 million, but there's stringent things that these builders have to meet.
Yeah.
I know a local builder who was talking about this with us, and he had tried to meet some of this criteria. He couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It was so difficult to get any of this funding that he just walked away from it.
Yeah.
I think the government is just not quite aware of exactly what these things entail.
No, I don't think so either. I don't think that it's a well thought out plan. Everything is so interrelated.
Yeah.
When you step back and you look at it, that housing, like, you try and solve the skilled labor shortage problem with immigration, but then immigration, where are we going to put people?
Yeah.
Like, if we can't even house the local community, how do we house more people? And then inflation, okay, the cost of everything has gone up. And, you pair that with rising interest rates as well. Mind you, interest rates are kind of coming back down a little bit. Like, we're seeing that a little bit right now.
That's all based off of inflation. And then inflation was caused by supply and demand after COVID, by shutting down world economies.
Yeah.
And then there's, some
so
taxes.
many things went into that.
Some taxes that are put into place that are driving inflation, and you can't say it's not, because it is.
Yeah.
When that carbon tax is implemented, that rises delivery costs, that production costs, and then all of that is factored down to the consumer.
Yeah.
So, build. I want to go back to this local builder who is looking. They need to get financing to build more houses,
Yeah.
and so people think that builders just have this money, but they don't. They don't have it stockpiled. They do have to borrow from lenders,
Yeah.
and they have to meet a certain rate. Like you were telling me the other day about a development down in Vancouver that was failing.
Yeah, 1050 Harrow, on Harrow and Thurlow in that Burrard corridor. So like back to what you said, builders don't just have all this money, they build it and then they start selling things off. It's like, no, you sell them off in phases so that you can pay the interest on what your loan is from the bank. So BMO, they owe BMO like $82 million and
Wow.
they just went under. Yeah. And that project would have been, well, I don't live in that community anymore, so I can't really speak to how well it's being received. But it was going to be 2 towers, mixed residential, commercial. There was going to be a daycare center in there, 44,000 square feet of retail space. And then it was 450 residential units plus 66 tenant, like rental units. So, I mean, this would have been a lot of housing for a lot of people.
Right.
Mind you, I don't know what the price point was, if they were luxury suites or anything like that. But the thing is that, when you take out that builder's loan, that developer's loan, and then a year later interest rates have skyrocketed, all of a sudden it's like you can't meet that criteria anymore. You can't even meet the assessments. And so they couldn't even get the project off the ground.
Yeah, and that's going to affect whether it's high-end housing or not. It's more housing, which it decreases increases supply, which will bring the prices down slightly. Like so people, seniors, and etc. can renters can afford somewhere to stay.
Yeah. Speaking of seniors, there was another development company that just went under as well. Real estate led every single industry with bankruptcy and insolvency filings in 2023.
Right.
Isn't that sad?
That's crazy.
Like development companies and builders can't afford to build, and this is companies, not personal
residents.
Consumer insolvencies. They're corporate insolvencies. But in Quebec, one of the biggest developers, 2 of the biggest developers, I should say, Groupe Haute and Groupe Selection, the 2 of them combined own their real estate portfolios worth well over $2 billion. And they dealt mostly in aging senior housing. So they just went under, and it's like that is a huge impact to a vulnerable community, a vulnerable sector of the community.
Yeah.
I remember it was like super huge in the news, and this judge had to preside, and every decision that they make over this bankruptcy and how they're going to proceed and how they're going to restructure impacts so many people.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know really where to go with this, but I do know that it's not Airbnbs.
No, it's a Band-Aid fix. It's a quick solution to lock down on Airbnbs and secondary residences.
And it's not what's going to fix the problem.
No.
We got to have a strategic plan in place.
Yeah.
We got to, in my opinion, I mean, first and foremost, you got to just limit that amount of migration. We can't have that mass migration.
Yeah.
Can't. It absolutely floods everything.
And municipalities are already addressing short-term and vacation rentals already. They're putting restrictions in place. Like even in Sylvan Lake, we have a licensing program.
Right.
So you have to be licensed. You have to pay the fee. You have to register. You have to be licensed to operate an Airbnb in Sylvan Lake.
Yeah.
And like Canmore.
That's smart.
Yeah, it is. And like Canmore,
Right.
I remember you talking about Canmore way back in the day.
Oh yeah, back when Airbnb or VRBO just became popular.
8 years ago, 9 years ago kind of thing.
They I know they started curbing it right away because they were worried about their hospitality and tourism industry, hotels, right? And I disagreed with them at the time because I thought, okay, great, you're opening the door for corporations,
right,
but
to survive.
not for Joe Blow who can make a little bit of bucks.
Yeah.
But I didn't see long term how
Effects.
that Airbnb VRBO vacation rental is going to have effect on the community, renters, etc. Value of houses.
I wouldn't consider Canmore, like I would never correlate affordability with Canmore.
No.
Ever. That's just me.
Yeah.
I don't think like a 2-bedroom apartment in Canmore for $1.5 million is affordable by any means to the average person.
You're right. It's not affordable. You're paying for lifestyle in Canmore. It's right
Yeah.
next door to Banff.
Yeah.
I know Banff, you have to live there to own a house. You can't, they do not allow speculators, I guess,
Yeah.
to buy properties and to use them as an investment. You have to live there to own it.
But then that ties into the labor force in those tourist towns as well, because how do they survive? Where do they live? Like we had a whole bunch of Australians in Whistler, and I still think like a large population goes there to work because why wouldn't they? It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And they get to enjoy Whistler on their days off and all that kind of stuff. So the tourism community feeds into the tourism of, no, that doesn't make any sense. So like if
the
you
working community feeds into the tourism community.
Yeah.
They're doing both. They're working and playing while they're there.
And where do you live? You're probably living with 3-4 other people while you're working there.
I know there's always people looking for rentals out
Yeah.
there, and they're multi-tenanted housing.
Yeah.
No, it's not, there's 5 or 6 people in one house, not just 1 or 2 or a family.
Yeah. BC in general, I mean, they've got their Airbnb short-term housing vacation rental limitations coming into effect on May 1st.
Yeah.
And those, I think that will help some properties and some communities, but I don't think that that's going to make a huge impact by any means.
Not the impact I don't think that they're hoping for.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I really hope it does for the sake of renters and for the sake of people who can't qualify to buy a home or for, circumstances, right? Life
Right.
circumstances. Everybody's different. But there really needs to be a focus on how do we solve a housing crisis?
Not only that, but how do we also keep these communities who not sole focus, but their industry is tourism.
Yeah.
You need those people to still go there. If they don't have tourists, their industry, their communities are going to falter.
Yeah. Well, BC exempted 14 resort communities. So Fernie, Golden, Revi, Osoyoos, Kimberly, Radium Hot Springs, a whole bunch of others. I can't remember their names.
Well,
but
I mean, that was pretty good target rate or amount right there.
that was like 6 of them right
Yeah.
off the bat. Yeah. But if your municipality's population is under 10,000, 10,000? Yes, 10,000. Unless you're adjacent to a larger population municipality, that under 10,000 population is exempted from the restrictions as well.
Oh, right, because it's still too small. I guess they need to have
Tiny.
Yeah.
So that's probably like your Airbnb-ing for transient workers
Right.
who come into the community, work for a certain period of time.
Yeah,
and then
I know, for example, Sycamoose has like 0 rentals available.
Yeah.
I know the big industry out there is the houseboating, building, just renting as well.
Yeah.
And I know they have to put up camps to house workers that come in for the summer.
Yeah.
So to really wrap everything up, I think we're both on the same page. It's not just Airbnbs that are going to solve our problem.
No.
They're a small portion of it.
Yeah. It's the easiest quick fix.
The easiest quick fix.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even call them Airbnbs. I would say all vacation and short-term rentals.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
Airbnb being the company synonymous with that. I mean, I get it, but I don't think it's fair.
okay. So that's not that's a it's a short-sighted fix, though part of the fix.
part of the problem for sure.
Building new houses is a part of the fix, but it's not going to fix the affordability.
No.
And rents are going to go up along with mortgages, and those mortgage rates are going up because of interest rates. So we all know what the problems are, and migration is one of them, along with everything else. So there is no real good fix to this
It's
other
going
than
to take a while.
putting a strategy in place.
Yeah, it's going to take a while.
There has to be a well thought out strategy amongst the governments, and I hate to put this on governments, but at this time, you kind of got to rely on the governments to do the right thing here.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, guys, hopefully we weren't too boring, and hopefully you did get some good information out of this and some good thought processes.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. And if you liked what you saw, join us in the next video where we discuss more trending topics.
Perfect.
See you next time.
Bye, guys.